On the regenerative journey, our goal is to nurture and facilitate the lives and journeys of all our followers, which is why we've teamed up with resource consulting service RCS, Australia's leading provider of education and advisory services in regenerative agriculture. RCS trains and consults across the ag sector, from individuals and families through to corporates and even government, empowering people to grow productive and profitable businesses in diverse and, importantly, healthy landscapes. They understand that the future of healthy families, resilient communities and regenerative farming lies in holistic education. Over the last 15 years, they've played an integral role in my own regenerative journey, and I have a lot to thank RCS for, and I'm one of 7,500 others who have attended their farming and grazing for profit course. I don't know where I'd actually be, and I certainly wouldn't be this far down my own regenerative journey if I hadn't completed a significant amount of training with the RCS team. I can't recommend more highly RCS to anyone looking to start their regenerative journey in a supportive and proven environment. Terry McCosker and your team, you absolutely rock. And we're also absolutely stoked to be collaborating with them now. For my listeners only, we're offering a 10% discount on all farming and grazing for profit schools and grazing clinics in Australia this year. If you add this to the early bird rate of a 7-day school, you could get a whopping $1,000 off the standard price. Simply add the code CharlieRCS, that's CharlieRCS, that's one word, at the checkout to get your concession. How awesome is that? Now head to the show notes to find out more.
That's the beauty of landscape. I think that's what the artists get and the poets that I never really could do in any other way. They can do those things. A good artist can capture that and live through that, I think. Not that I can paint or draw or dance or sing, but that's my version of it.
That was Bart Davidson, and you're listening to The Regenerative Journey. From wherever we are, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia, recognising their continuing connection to this land, its waterways, the stars in the skies since time immemorial. We pay our respects to the elders, knowledge holders, and to all the generations of First Nations peoples who have nurtured their unceded sovereign lands for over 80,000 years and continue to do so today.
G'day, I'm your host Charlie Arnott, an 8th generational Australian regenerative farmer. And in this podcast series, I'll be diving deep and exploring my guests' unique perspectives on the world so you can apply their experience and knowledge to cultivate your own transition to a more regenerative way of life.
Welcome to The Regenerative Journey with your host, Charlie Arnott.
G'day and welcome back to The Regenerative Journey. And before I introduce this week's guest, who you already know because you've already heard a quote from the young man, I'm just going to bang on about a few other things before we slip into a bit of an intro for that particular guest and then get on with the interview. Just a reminder for everyone, the RCS conference is on, the Convergence conference is on the 16th and 17th of July in Brisbane. Grab your tickets at RCSC 2022. .com.au or go to the RCS Australia website and grab your tickets because they'll be going quickly, I suggest. I'm going to be there, and which isn't necessarily a reason you should be there, but it's going to be a fantastic couple of days. All sorts of people in there in person presenting, and also a few virtual legends such as Zach Bush. If you haven't heard of the Bush before, a lovely fellow. I did some work with him 2 years ago now. Actually, it was literally the week when the COVID exploded around the world, and he luckily got home within a few days of that. This is from in Melbourne, it was, and then literally the next week it just all went batshit, didn't it? So haven't spoken with or haven't interviewed Zach yet, but will be. I suspect my wife's coming in very shortly with a prana chai. Anyone who likes prana chai, I'm not sure what this brand this is, but it's absolutely delicious. The jury's out on what milk to use. Dairy's good. Yes, she is. What milk is it?
Actually, it should be oat, organic oat.
Yes.
But I've accidentally picked up the organic soy. So I'm really big on soy, but I wasn't going to tell you.
Hello, my boy.
It's supposed to be a secret.
Bring that?
Daddy's doing his work.
Why did you bring it?
Because I'm just having a little chat with my friends, my listeners. Bye. See you, big boy. Thanks, Mum. Organic oat. See, I'm still not sure about that either because I just don't know what else is in the organic oat, other ingredients. Anyway, that's another. I didn't intend to talk about one's choice of milk with chai. I don't mind. I mean, I love dairy. That's what I usually have. Well, that's what I have with everything except chai. It used to be soy until I read some fascinating information on a website. I'm not sure it's even there still, called Soy Online. All sorts of crazy pseudo estrogen type of components in soy milk. Don't have. Actually, it sounds like I've got it now, but you don't want to drink too much of that stuff. Given from what I understand, especially if it's GMO soy, that's probably double bad. But just as a milk, I think it's sort of having pseudoestrogen in it might kind of, well, there's studies suggesting that males grow breasts and all sorts of other crazy things. I don't know why I didn't mean to get to that part of it all, but anyway. Let's continue. I think I probably said enough. Let's just slip into the interview now. I had some other things to say, but I'll save it up for later. We did talk about the RCS conference there, the convergence of agriculture and human and planetary health. It is going to be a ripper. Now let's just slip into just a quick plug for workshops. We do have some workshops coming in South Australia. I think by the time this goes out, we might actually be in South Australia. So there are some dates for Queensland in the sort of last couple of weeks of June. So get on the website charliearnott.com.au to check those out. There's probably early bird tickets still there available. So if you do that, you're going to make a pretty substantial saving, especially if just get yourself along, get the discount, get the early bird and see you at one of our workshops. On with the show. This episode's with Bart Davidson, and I've known Bart for some time. I actually heard about Bart. I mean, he's the kind of guy that you hear about a lot before you actually get to meet them. A bit of a legend, old Bart. And I heard snippets. Great example of kind of the myth and the man and what actually is true. I always only ever heard great things about Bart, I have to say. Certainly from the days in Moree and as an agronomist, I think I can safely say he was an agronomist there. Probably wouldn't call himself an agronomist now necessarily. However, fascinating journey. Such a delightful fella. So we only had a limited amount of time actually because we recorded early in the morning before, it was on the second day of the my grazing field day up there at Wilmot at Ebor in New South Wales in late February it was, and Bart was good enough to squeeze me in just before the field day sort of started off the day two part of it. It was very wet. There is I'm pretty sure there's some rain. You can hear in the background. There's a bit of banter around that, but we had an hour and a bit. It was a lovely conversation. I don't know if I need to bang on much more about it, to be honest. You're going to slip into the interview right now with Bart Davidson, and I really hope you enjoy listening and learning and understanding Bart's regenerative journey as much as I did listening and recording it. Bart Davidson. Welcome to the regenerative journey, and welcome to, I believe it's Lisa's cottage here at the neighbouring property of Wilmot, where we are. Just come a little bit forward there, mate. That's it. He's a bit nervous. It's like I'm a dentist and I'm about to operate on him.
And I've only been to the dentist twice in 20 years, Charlie.
I can tell that. No,
it's true. It's true.
Really?
Last week I went to the dentist for the second time in 20 years and she said, whatever you're doing, just keep doing it.
Really? What do you do?
Not much, actually.
Yeah? Do you brush your tussies, though?
Oh, not so much, actually.
Really?
No, I actually chew a lot of chewing gum and I'm always cleaning my teeth, but just not in the conventional way.
Not with a brush.
Not where I imagine we were going to start this conversation, Charlie.
Mate, that is not a unique thing to happen. Whose black dog is that out there?
No idea.
Pissing on. I'm glad that fence isn't electric.
I didn't bring him.
I'm sure it's domesticated. Mate, welcome to Lisa's cottage. We've got a bit of echo there, but I think that'll be absolutely fine. Okay, I'm just going to check something. I'm not even sure if I can even do this while we've got the thing on there. The noise gate. Do I leave that on? I think I will.
I must say it's a very impressive bit of gear you've got here, Charlie?
Yeah, well, I'm learning to drive it. I've got my L plates on even after 2 years. There's stuff in there, I'm sure it does, that I just really don't know. I should update the software in it. But look, seems to be okay. I can hear you. You can hear me. Mate, let's start by I know this isn't your house or your farm, or the view is probably somewhat unfamiliar looking out at what looks to have been maybe an orchard, or still is, I'm not sure. What, sitting here looking at nature, looking at, what we're looking at some of the landscape of Ebor, what does it mean to you, and why do you, without all the detail of work necessarily, but what is it about Ebor and this part of the world that kind of brings you back here?
Oh, well, it's not work. I shouldn't say that, but I guess there's actually a trout that changed the world.
Trout?
Yeah, it's true. I didn't expect to start the conversation with this one, but
neither did I, mate.
We're looking here at the flip side of Wilmot. And, there is a trout that changed the world.
Tell me about that.
Let's do a short story of that one. But
yeah, totally. Let's start there. I love trout.
The reason I love this part of the world, and I do find myself here quite often, sometimes not enough in some people's view, and sometimes too often in that same person's view.
Are we going to get to that person?
So, no, look, quite seriously, my father was driving from somewhere to Brisbane in the 60s. 1960s, and stopped up at Jock's Water, which is just up the road here.
Little creek or little...
Well, it's the third of the three streams that are the confluence at the bottom of Wilmot.
Yeah, nice.
And it's the middle one, actually. And Dad stopped, camped the night, got wet, as people do when they camp in Ebor, got up the next day and caught what is to this day still the biggest trout that he's ever caught.
No way.
And he's travelled a lot. He's an avid fly fisherman. So, long story short, he fell in love with that drive and that part of the world. And then, as I grew up, he'd bring me up here.
Really? That's a lovely little reconnection then, yeah?
There's a photo of me as a 5-year-old, I think, down at the butter factory.
Really? Which I went to a couple of years ago.
Beautiful spot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, depths of drought, I recall, actually. And any time in the years since then, I would do that run from Armadale to Coffs or wherever you go. I would always stop.
Really?
Yep. Maybe put a swag out, look at the waters, think about the trout, and a deep love of fly fishing evolved from that.
So that was obviously significant. Your father, that was a fly fishing moment he had, because I'm not a fly fisher, but is that the only way you can catch a trout?
In my book.
Yeah, right. Oh, okay, no, that's fair. I don't want to step into trout fishing territory.
No, it's important, but that's my go-to.
Wow! And tell me just more the detail of that trout. Is it for those who are avid fly fishermen? Is there a weight, a poundage that was significant apart from being the biggest one? Like just to give people a sense of.
Oh, it was a decent trout. It was a 4+ pound.
Yeah, right.
The first trout that changed my world, and. There's a few trout around now, but droughts in between mean that... at the end of the day, right, trout are the indicator species in my book. I know that's not true ecologically, and all the ecologists out there are going to cane me for it, but in this environment, for me, for us, for what we're trying to do at a place like Wilmot, if the water's good, and if we will not see trout grow if the insects aren't good. The insects aren't going to be good if the grass isn't good. If we don't get the grazing right, the grass isn't going to be good. So it all comes together, and then when I see the fish growing, I think, you know what, we're smashing it.
Things are okay. Yeah. Do you know historically what the trout kind of population has been? I mean, so the creeks that run through Wilmot and feed, I guess larger rivers, Jimeric. So I always get that bloody wrong.
You're down the hill, mate. You should know this, right? So we are at the top of the Clarence.
Oh, the second biggest,
the second biggest catchment in Australia, behind the Fitzroy.
Fairhingham.
It's a big catchment, and we're sitting on the top of it. We're about 50 metres from the top of it.
And I also know that the largest inland island in the world is in the Clarence River. Is it island, Richmond Island? No, I'm not trying to show off it, just because a mate used to live on it or next to it. My question was about trout. So one question, are they, excuse my ignorance, are they native? They've been put in there.
Okay, we're going to have to, no.
No.
No, unfortunately not. But look, in this part of the world, there's, and again, I'm going to get cane from the ecologists here, but I'm actually a trained ecologist too, so I'll just step in there. No, they're not native. Eels, yabbies, frogs, they're native here, but we're actually on the eastern side of the fall. So we're in this unique place where 3 streams are coming together at the bottom of Wilmot, and we're actually sitting about 50 metres from one of those. And, they fall quite a long way. There's a lot of gravity. We're talking about 200 metres of fall down there, and then it runs down to the Clarence slowly but surely through a number of junctions. And cod, the now near extinct and endangered eastern cod, in those waters, a prolific, beautiful fish that used to come all the way up to the falls, essentially, and we're sitting at the top of those falls.
They came, hundreds of metres through the...
Oh, well, the native cod are known to be not far downstream from us here, and the endangered types. And there's only a few places in the world that will find them.
Wow.
So we're at the top of that. The cod can't get up the falls. The eels can. There's not much else that lives in their native habitat. So the trout have found their way around the world, for all sorts of reasons. But they're just they're a sport fish, obviously, but they're a good indicator of the ecology, because you won't hold trout if the ecology is no good.
And if is that sort of even good fishing fish, good eating fish, and an ecological indicator? Are there members of the community who kind of think, well, we should, a bit like, I don't know, you shouldn't have exotic trees in the landscape or cattle, saying, look, we should get rid of those trout because they are wrecking the environment?
It's not so much a conversation. No, I think that the beautiful thing about this ecology is that it sorts itself out. It really does. It's we've got a lot of coexistence between the natives, and my end goal here, apart from helping these guys grow a lot of grass, is to see a good balance between the natives, the eels, the cod, trout, if they hold their way. It's a fight. It's a survival of the fittest game here, right? So if trout fit, good, great. We love looking at them, but at the end of the day, it's all about the landscape taking care of itself and us helping the landscape find its balance.
Which we are going to dig right into a bit later after you, Bart, start me on your regenerative journey. And when I say that, doesn't mean you have to have had a regenerative experience at age 2 or something. This is about Bart Davidson, getting to understand your life and the journey you've been on, and we'll get back to Lisa's cottage at some point.
Sure. I'm just slouching here and falling asleep with the relaxation of your dulcet tones.
Don't do that. You would be the first. Just come forward. Just bring the chair a bit forward, Emma. Yeah, that's it. Just to keep your gob near that. You would be the first guest who's done that. There's probably been quite a few that probably wanted to,
right,
and probably had to struggle to stay awake. But I'll kick you if you do.
I'm feeling relaxed, Charlie. So
that was the intention.
Look, I'm not sure.
It might have been something to do with that roll you dropped in your coffee.
So, look, I guess I was trying not to think about this morning, but I was. I think in my pre-dawn cogitations, as I want to do.
As you and I do.
Look, it's a good question. Stu mentioned yesterday in his preamble at the fantastic field day that...
Yeah, we want to talk about that too.
He was questioning his why. Why was he up at night? Why was he up in the morning? And I get there sometimes. And look, it's a long. There's a lot of stuff there. But I guess for me, if I was to think of one thing, I can vividly recall. There's a lot of things we forget, but I vividly recall being Donga in a little place out of Kununurra, long way from nowhere. And
age?
I wasn't 20 yet, so I would have been 19-ish.
Okay.
And crook as a dog. Crook as a dog.
There's a lot of stuff that must have happened between 0 and 19, which we can get back to.
There if you like. But
but
in terms of the regenerative journey,
yeah.
Let's just snip it there. I mean, there was a journey to that point too, because obviously lifestyle affects a lot of stuff. But I recall being crook as a dog, working like a dog, I was the youngest guy on the site. And
doing what?
I was actually a mine. Yep. I was doing my version of Power of One. I just read that recently, or reread that recently, working in the mines. But crook as a dog, they flew me out, and which was a bit special because I'd never been flown out, and ended up in hospital. took a few looks around and they put a few pipes in the bottom and up the top and said, "We think you've got cancer." So I remember the doctor saying, "We're going to cut you from here to here. Actually, we're going to cut you from here to here. And we're going to send you
straight through this." For those who are on the audio, yes, straight sternum down to God knows.
And okay, so they sent me off. I went to Darwin and a bit of poking and prodding. This is pre-digital time, so it's and it was pretty wild time too. That was 90s, early 90s, I think. And anyway, long story short, I didn't get cut open. They couldn't find it. It wasn't there. It was a mistake. But I was crook as a dog. I had a bunch of things going on there with my guts, and it was just a reboot. I guess, Charlie, and I ended up. It was a confluence of a bunch of things, but at that point in time, I had just decided to go back to uni and to start again because I had been to uni prior to that, but I wasn't very content. So I read the UAC, the admissions book, on everything in the country, every single opportunity, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to go and understand this thing, this ecology. So I went off and studied at ANU. So what had led to, to run us through all the detail, but I mean, your life in some ways to that point wasn't related to ecology. Why did it sort of stand out? Because it was such a foreign thing? It's a good question. I was a city kid. Grew up on the beach, northern beaches of Sydney, far top end there. My stomping ground was the Hawkesbury. Surfer? Broken Bay. A little bit, but I wasn't good enough. I was more of a... Don't say that, mate. More of a fisherman, but I love the water for sure. And but I left home when I was 18 and I never really went back. But, I didn't go back categorically, but since the age I could walk, one of my first memories is being down the road here with a fly fish. 12. Was it? No, 5. And Dad taking brother and I, around the country, just walking streams, walking creeks, walking streams, walking creeks, and looking and learning and observing and just being part of that environment. And actually, I'll never forget walking into an electric fence for the first time. It took me 5 minutes to work out what the hell had just happened. I'm 6 years old. I'm on my own, and I figured it out. And then, there was a transition there where I spent a lot of time in the scrub, a lot of time in the bush, just being a kid and fly fishing, fortunately. And it just became a go-to that I never left behind. And so then through time, I was very poor at a lot of things at school, but I wasn't too bad at numbers. Science was a bit of a thing for me, and maths, and I had started a journey towards aeronautical engineering, and I thought, it's just not me. So that's when I booted myself out of home, and I went travelling and with a mate, $400 in our pocket and half a ute each, or a third of a ute in the end, actually, and then travelled the country working on farms. And the more I saw, the more I thought, there's just something not quite adding up here, because I'm a bit of a numbers guy, I can't help it. And that was a couple of years of just pretty wild kind of times too. But I guess at an instinctive level, I kind of just couldn't understand how it worked. So I wanted to learn. When you say want to know how it worked, and what, from a numbers perspective, what were you sort of seeing that made you think it's not working or there's something needs? We're shooting out here a little bit, but... That's right, mate. There's no set structure. I remember... Okay, so I came from a very kind of analytical, and I am a reasonably analytical person at times, and I remember... You're like the Rain Man, right? No, a long way from it, but I remember thinking... I'm an instinctive person, but I'm also quite analytical, and so even as a 18, 19-year-old travelling around the country in a ute, working when we needed to because we were broke, working out how these farms worked and how those farms worked, and just being larrikins as we went, and then spending time with people in their businesses as farmers, right? I can think of one farm up in Kununurra where you spend enough time there and you get to know the nuts and bolts of it, and you just do the numbers in your head. The 3 years out of 4, if they don't get a cyclone that wipes them out, they're making money. They get a cyclone, it's break even. Get 2 cyclones, it's all over. So those simple kind of numbers. And then you just look at the supply and demand, you look at the frailties of being isolated and getting stuff to market, and then what people are prepared to pay for that. and then the frailties in between, then the aeroplane spraying stuff, the tractors putting out the fertiliser, the labour. You just run it in your head and you say, oh, this is... And then the land values, water, the whole thing. It was a different world then too, in the 90s, so it feels like it anyway. So, and certainly Kununurra's. And it just... And the Burdekin and other parts of Queensland, the NT where we work. But it just struck me that this just looks frail. It just looks frail. It looks highly levered and geared and doing a hell of a job, but it just looks frail. So, long story short, I thought, back, I wanted to understand it. I guess that's one of my downfalls and at times strengths is to try and deconstruct and then reconstruct and understand and get comfortable, right? Let's do it.
So that was so you're looking at the ag world and farming and, inputs, outputs, and there's obviously an environmental element because that's, farms are in environments and
particularly those on the river. Particularly those on the river, which I love about where we are right here, because that's the end result, right? If the river's no good, everything's no good.
So the impression you got in that year was this is not working, the farming sector. You did it.
I'll interrupt you. I don't know. I don't think I concluded this is not working. I couldn't understand how this could work.
Could work, right?
It just instinctively just didn't quite mechanically look like this could be permanent.
Mm.
And I'm interested in permanence. So I thought, right. Anyway, look, I wasn't that conscious of it. I just decided to go back to uni. I cogitated on that. I went to uni. I went to the mines to make some money so I could afford to do it. And it kind of coalesced. And so I found myself back at uni studying ecology and then into the soils and all the stuff that followed from there.
So, okay. So there was a pretty clear line of sight between the agriculture curiosity about how it could work, and then ecology was kind of a leap, because because you could have gone, I'm going to go to Sydney Uni and do ag science. That's going to fix.
I was very conscious of not doing that for some reason, and I'd been to Sydney Uni doing aeronautical, so I wasn't going back there. So not that it's a bad place, but a lot of history. No, I was determined not to do the ag science thing, not that I think that's a bad call for those out there doing it. It just struck me as too structured, too linear at that time at least, and wasn't really looking at the fundamentals underneath it. Right, it was actually just trying to work. My understanding of ag science at that time at least was that it was still quite... it didn't know about holism. It didn't understand interconnectedness. Again, big call, but that was just my appreciation of it. And so I was looking for those places I could study to understand that group of connections instinctively that I couldn't have articulated at the time. And fortunately, I had my eyes on playing rugby actually, so I thought the Brumbies were about to get a go, so I went to Canberra in the misguided thinking that I might actually one day play a bit of rugby and or return to rugby. And anyway, ended up at ANU, came under the tutelage of a bloke called David Demerick, who was I think that's even still one of the only, if not the best, farmer that became an academic. And
is one of those Demericks from up here?
Don't know. Actually, I don't. I think he is. I think he. But anyway, he was a great man. He was an incredible influence on my thinking. Absolutely, and it was in the world where you could actually get to know the guy that was running the course, had written the curriculum. It was one of the first. I think it was probably the first environmental management degrees in Australia. So it preceded that kind of line of thought. It was still the 90s, and anyway, that was a deeply constructive influence over my thinking. And we were looking at social ecology, agroecology, the underlying of Ehrlich's work and all of the 70s kind of stuff being brought together mathematically rather than just emotionally. And that just talked to me. So I was love at first sight.
Do you? That's a lovely way to put it. Did you, in either at the time or later, look back? And I'm kind of paralleling a bit of experience at rural science up here at Armidale. Did you look back at it and go? You talked about holism there before, and was the topics and the subjects, were they well sort of put together in terms of the holism of ecology, or were they quite this is the physics and this is the chemistry and this is the...
No, that degree I was very fortunate. We went back over the soils, the chemistry. The chemistry was very strong. And again, being analytical, love chemistry, soil science. And didn't do much on the biology, I don't think, because at that stage it really wasn't still understood to the extent that it has become, I should say. No, it was more about the social ecology, I guess, if I think about it, because, the raw, brutal ecology of things is critical, but it's how we relate to that. And one of the things I can recall, and I'll probably never forget, is just that concept of deep ecology. It's not ecology because we give a shit about it. It's ecology because it matters. It's ecology irrespective of our relationship to it. And that kind of struck me as pretty important. And then that brings you to question where you are and why you're doing what you're doing and your role. And when you're dead and buried, what happens in between now and then to go past our own selfish appreciation of ecology and our place in the landscape, for those of us that are even thinking about it, to, we're all gone, what really matters then. And that's, I guess, back to deep ecology. And our relationship to these things really does, it mattered to me. So then you question everything. And I guess back to your very first question, that was the start of my regenerative journey when, we're coming out of the 70s and the 80s and that whole social disruption around our relationship to chemical and the green revolution at the end of the day. So
there's the landlord.
Lisa's Scottish, yeah. And she is good. She's on top of everything.
Yeah, no, without doubt.
So I was rambling. I think...
No, mate.
It's about the core of the underlying and not just being kind of shallow and I get that bit, let's go and do something. Let's go and run something. Let's go and grow something. It's more, how does this thing work underneath? I remember being emotionally wrecked at one point when Paul Keating was the Prime Minister, and I thought, I'm going to have to write a letter to this bloke. I'm going to climb the flagpole in Canberra and not come down until I get a meeting.
What had he done, or what were you doing?
I should just say, there's no big great story here. I didn't actually get up the flagpole. I didn't get to sit down with him.
But what was the catalyst for that, though? Like, what had he done? Was he just...
there wasn't enough... Look, I guess this is another one of those kind of sliding doors that people go through in their life, but it just clicked. I'd read enough. I'd had enough. I quit football. I'd stopped being a teenager loud. I'd already done my travel. I'd almost tried to kill myself a few times in practical ways, not emotional ways, just doing a lot of silly things. So I kind of had the chance to get all that out of my system. I was a mature age student. I'd gone back to uni. I wasn't being allowed like everybody else at the time.
And I was thinking... Age kind of, mid-20s? No, early.
Early 20s, yeah. First person I met, actually, when I went to Canberra was my now wife. We just had our 25th, love, wedding anniversary. And that was...
You mean that was the other bit of love at first sight that happened then?
Gotcha.
Was she doing the same course?
No, she thought she was going to be a psychologist, and she's still working on that. She hasn't got past me. I'm the only project she's got in it. It's almost done her in. It has actually done her in. So back to the point that I was thinking about those things. I wasn't giving myself the time to go and get drunk and play rugby anymore. So I became deeply concerned. I guess at an instinctive and probably emotional level, I thought this isn't working. It's obvious. What are these? What does everybody else not see why can't other people see what I'm instinctively saying mathematically and instinctively and functionally what we're doing right now in terms of the growth dilemma ultimately. I mean, it's a sustainability equation. It's just not. It's obvious this isn't going to end well if we don't change how we do what we do. And by that I mean eat, right? So I don't know if I can actually credit it to David Dumeric, but I've always remembered that he said, if you eat, you're involved. And that just kind of go, okay, I eat. Right?
Well, that's not a dissimilar thing Joel Salatin sort of spooks about too, and many others. It's absolutely right.
So when I took that in and then I looked at, essentially I deconstructed it. I rebuilt it in my own terms, in my own relationships to how farms work and how we harvest enough for us to be a society. Just didn't add up. So I said, we better talk to the top dog. And I didn't get that meeting.
What did you do? You didn't chin up the the flagpole, what was your plan B?
I got very frustrated, actually. I wrote letters, and I guess you're touching on one of my other frailties. It's communication. I wasn't able to cut through, and I just thought I did what I generally do, which is then let's go, okay, head down, ass up, and let's go and do it. Or let's get busy, which is another frailty of mine. And that kind of, if I'm doing something and if I feel like I'm actively employing myself, then it's okay, even whether it's effective or not. And that's another one of the challenges of life, is to work out when it is and when it's not working, to keep going. So I was fortunate. I was really fortunate in terms of career, and you look back how things work out. I ran into a bloke that was deeply embedded in the biodynamic and organic world, and part of my studies was actually, I'd never heard of biodynamics. I didn't know what it was. Rudolf Steiner and the whole thing. And I read those histories and Steiner's books and logic and I thought, there's something going on here, but again, there's a lot of stuff wrapped around this thing that I want to understand. So I read and I wrote and I visited a lot of farms as part of my studies and became comfortable with it. And that was actually a stepping stone then to a bunch of things that happened in the years after that.
So left uni with fire in the belly.
I'd say so, yeah.
What was then?
Well, I was very lucky. Right? I essentially, even before I finished uni, I think from memory, I managed to get a gig visiting a lot of organic farms as part of what was the BFA, Biological Farmers of Australia. And a bloke called Mal William was misguided enough to think I had enough energy and intellect perhaps to go and do stuff that he was getting a bit tired of. And I was just very, very lucky. I got to visit just about every organic farm at the time and biodynamic farm in New South Wales. And then as time evolved, I got to see pretty much most of Australia and Japan too, for that matter, with that role. And
as a certifier for BFA?
Yeah, that was part of the role, yeah. And I guess that was a beautiful thing, because in retrospect, that role required me to, again, in my terms, not necessarily other people's terms, to deconstruct how this thing worked and be confident enough in that this thing is doing what it's saying it's doing, or not doing what it's saying it's not doing. More to the point. And I became troubled with that too. But initially I was great. It was just fantastic. I got to see some incredible parts of the country, diverse, inland, arid, extensive, intensive, frail, boisterous. And that was my next few years, as well as knocking about doing other things to try and earn some money. But I guess I became uncomfortable with that, actually, because I could see that there was a lot of story built into the farm and the businesses that were doing reasonably well, and then I'd see them over time. And I mean, years, 1 to 5 to 10 years pass by, and some would make it and some wouldn't, and I'd question why, and I'd go back to the core of the thing that I've, I guess, been very strong on since then and followed through in my career, is the underlying, the soil, the ecology, the biology, the whole caper, and not being tangled up in the story too much, which is what I was seeing, which is what troubled me. That's a whole other conversation. But I guess the point was I was fortunate to be in a place in time when organics was growing quickly. People were still questioning what is sustainable. It was that whole sort of fetal stage of where we are now with the regenerative journey. I think in my terms, because I was a young fella then. Obviously, it was chapters and chapters before that. And so I was fortunate. I got to see those systems through drought, through good times, struggle as well. I don't think organics really hit the mark in the end. I don't think it met its potential, and I think that's because it was focused on what you can't do rather than what you can do. And there's a whole bunch of stuff going on there in terms of tribes and competing philosophies in what was an open space, which is natural enough. It's evolved. It's great. And biodynamics was in that. And as soon as I understood biodynamics to the extent that I think I do, I was kind of all in. I'm one of those guys in, right? Let's have a go at that and get the waterworks going, and I felt very comfortable with that. And so that never really left. But what was needed was to go away and have a look at other systems. So I spent a lot of time in corporate farming, and larger, more intensive, non-organic, non-biodynamic farms. Again, just pulling them apart, trying to work out what made them tick. And then all of that, if I think about it, and I probably haven't enough, although I do recall leaving when we sold our own farm sometime in the Millennium Drought, I remember distinctively saying, I'm coming back when I'm good enough and when I've got enough money to do it properly. And so my challenge at that time, or my self-imposed constraint, because I was walking away from something that had, 5 kilometres of beautiful river. And
You'd bought a farm? Yeah.
Yeah, another story. And my reconciliation with that, because I found it very difficult to sell the farm, was that I would come back bigger and better. And my challenge was to go and learn enough to be good enough to go and do this easily, because it was hard. Have enough money, have enough, just to be the best at what I wanted to be the best at. And since then I've actually realised I don't need the farm. There's enough farms out there, Charlie. There's plenty of farms and plenty of opportunities to enjoy what is ultimately sitting in the landscape. That's really what I want to do.
So you, in some ways, without being sort of beholden to a farm to work on, you can influence and contribute to the betterment of hundreds of thousands of hectares of.
It depends on the day and the week and who you talk to, but I think I live a blessed existence because I get to vicariously live through other people's landscapes and borrow them for a little while, or step through them and observe them, and ultimately I'm a reflective thinker, and I love to just watch how things work. And yes, I get to share that with other people's farms now, and I don't feel like I need to own them, or that's the beauty of landscape. I think that's what the artists get and the poets that I never really could do in any other way. They can do those things. A good artist can capture that and live through that, I think. Not that I can paint or draw or dance or sing, but that's my version of it.
So,
so you are an artist.
A poor one.
But what if you could? What's your modality as a good artist? What is that?
I'm tone deaf. I've got a daughter that's an incredible artist, and other people. And my brother's an incredible ergonomist. In terms of design and drawing and so on. I haven't got any of that. I've got nothing.
But I guess you mentioned you brought artistry into the conversation. Yours isn't with a brush and
it's how you express it, right? I mean, at the end of the day, people who are good at what we socially know to be art, I guess, have found that means of expressing and communicating and articulating in their own way, whether it's through music or movement or the visual painting or the digital version of it these days. I just never had that. So
a paddocks, your kind of palette and your canvas.
The thing I love about grazing, right? I mean, I spent a lot of time in cropping, irrigation, the whole deal, which I loved as well. The thing I love about grazing is just this mosaic. It's just this tapestry mosaic where we get to come and go, and it's constantly changing. It's constantly giving you another opportunity to take a different view of it and to learn from it and to reflect on what you've learned since the last time you were looking at it, or a different version of it. How does this one differ from that one? Different rainfall, different valley, different district, different region, different continent. That's a very human thing too, though, I think, to want to know how we relate to where we are, because we get to move around. It's probably one of the most core sort of human needs, but it's just that I'm in a very fortunate position of being able to spend more time than some, although less more recently, visiting landscapes. And then I guess my art might be that I try and put numbers to them that explain why something might be something, or why something might have changed in some way. And that's where I guess I always go back to the data.
Painting by numbers.
Maybe painting by numbers, I guess. That's come up along the way a few times for sure. And that is at my very core, if I think, you really did get me thinking overnight, why? This is an almost philosophical challenge that we all face. And just
I'm just trying to help your wife work through it. I'm joining a team.
There is a team. It can be a bashed and battered team at times, but it's actually I'm hesitant to say this because it's a bit wild for someone that's only just had 2 coffees and there's no there's no alcohol inside. It's the meaning of life stuff at the end of the day. Why do you do what you do, and why is it important? Because you could do anything. We could all do anything. That's yes, selfish because we actually need to use energy to go and do things and get around the world to do that. But we have choices, and we're very fortunate to have choices. So for me to be able to do what I do, I'm very blessed. Yeah, absolutely.
Looking for more information to assist your regenerative journey? Come join Charlie and his guests around the kitchen table, an online community of supporters with exclusive access to the Regenerative Journey interview transcripts, live online Q&A sessions, a chance to engage with other like-minded people and more. Go to www.charliearnott.com.au/the kitchen table, and we look forward to sharing a yarn with you. Now let's get back to this week's episode.
I want to get back to that farm because that sort of popped up there. But before we do, I just want to touch on referencing our mate Doug Avery, the resilient farmer who was here. So he talked about...
Wasn't he a dude?
Yeah, he was unreal, wasn't he?
Yeah.
His and you just mentioned there you can do anything, and he sort of had the anecdote about the flea in the jar hitting the ceiling and kind of, remove that lid and it doesn't jump any higher. It kind of just gets stuck in that.
Beautiful parable.
This is all I can do.
Yeah.
That was wonderful. Back to the farm. So BFA certifying, travelling around farm.
Look, I had a period of years or whatever it was now. It might have only been 3 or 4 years, I forget, where organics was really busting. It was going for it. And, I got to see a lot of country and even travel overseas a bit. And one thing led to another. And again, my lesson in life is equity. So we borrowed a bunch of money. We went into a good family partnership, bought a property, went for it, and started a young family at the same time. Although we already had part of that young family at that stage. And we rocked along with a cattle job. It was a certified organic cattle job.
Whereabouts? What part of the world?
Beautiful little stretch of the Cudgegong River between Goulgong and Wellington, New South Wales.
Nice.
Yeah, beautiful spot. And, we saw the lot. We saw the floods. We had the whole El Nino to La Nina cycle there and loved it. It was hard though. And I was always away. I guess probably always looking over one of the things I love about fishing, and it took me about probably, 40 years to work this out, is the thing I love is always going around the next corner. What's around the next corner? I haven't seen that bit, or I haven't seen it like this before. And so the next farm or the next paddock is always back to that fishing corollary of what's just around the corner. And to having that farm, I was always looking around the corner. I was always working somewhere else. I was always interested in trying to be somewhere else. And actually, if I think about it now, in terms of those sliding door moments, I only thought of this morning, thinking about important people in life. And I remember we didn't have enough money. I heard of this thing called RCS, and it was this, they were running a course up in Kununurra. And I thought, gee, I haven't been up there for a while. And I missed a few fellas up there, and anyway, needed an excuse. So I actually had to hock the money to go to this bloody 7-day thing that people thought was...
Did you stay at Gulliver's Tavern up there? That was the pub.
But look, I know the Gulliver's Tavern well, don't worry. I know the hotel.
And Charlie Barbagallo's pizza shop over the road?
Anyway, let's not go there. I had some formative times in Kununurra. I used to stand on the door at the Hotel Kununurra, believe it or not. I was about 25 kilos heavier. And
you're a doorman?
I was a doorman at the Hotel Kununurra.
Fair dinkum.
I learned a lot of life lessons on the door at the Hotel Kununurra.
Oh, for sure.
This 7-day course, anyway, so I hocked some money. That's how broke we were. Might have sold a couple of cows maybe. And had to go to this thing and met David Hanlon and RCS and that whole... Anyway, so I became... And that was quite a turning point, actually, because I ended up then working with David, I don't know how long after that, but that began a journey of then instead of being a lone ranger, actually working with other people and then being absorbed into the RCS world as well. And it was a turning point. So long story short, I ended up travelling away so much that my wife kind of said, these numbers aren't stacking up, buddy. 50% of nights away. I think we had 3 toddlers at the time, and I think there was a turning point when actually there was one in the belly, one on the front, one on the back of the 4-wheeler, trying to move some adjustment cattle that were worth quite a bit at the time, some stud cattle, and I was pre-good phones, pre-smartphones, and I was somewhere else, and wifey said, "This isn't working." So so that was part of the start of not trying to do everything, which is something I try and do. Step back, let's actually go and live in town. And we actually went to Moree from there and began an RCS office with Mark Morton, actually. And now I think about it. And
Mark was yesterday.
He was, yeah. So to this day, the only bloke I've ever shared an office with. And and so we worked there, we worked in town. And
was he neat and tidy?
I think Mark would say that was one of the tougher experiences that he's been through. The office was actually at his farm, and I found it very difficult to actually work with someone else. And I to this day, I've never worked in an office with anyone else, and probably never will now that I've almost reached 50. So anyway, we learned a lot from running our own property. We had some terrible times with drought. We went through the full spectrum of things. But ultimately, equity killed us, and I learned some good hard lessons there to take forward. And I then decided, I'm just going to learn. Yeah, and so I was very fortunate. Again, fell on my feet, met David Hanlon, met RCS, was able to come up with a few ideas that resulted in growing some curriculum with RCS, and I was, again, very fortunate. I got to visit a hell of a lot of places, learn a lot about a lot of different parts of the country, and the journey just continued. Did you
teach GFP, Grazing for Profit?
No, my focus at that time was
agronomy, was it?
No, well, David and I actually went off on a little bit of a forward scout ninja team from the GFP crew to go into the cropping, to go into the soils, to go into the soil biology. My very first day, actually, I was thinking about this too for some reason. My first day on the gig as a paid employee for RCS was to fly from Mudgee to Sydney to Melbourne to Perth to pick up Elaine Ingham, to drive to Margaret River, do a 3-day version of this soils thing. It was one of the early days of the soil food web. Then fly to, I think it was Darwin, then Townsville, then back, and about a month later, a couple of toddlers at home, but that was a fantastic. I mean, imagine that, right? So I've just walked into Elaine Ingham's world, and spent a few years after that, I think, really just again deconstructing what she had exposed to all of us, and that continued. So back to the point, where were we? My focus with David was, the grazing thing was a reasonably well understood and reasonably well worn path. We were looking at the business of cropping, the biological farming. So we had a thing called the biological farming school, the biobusiness farming school, I should say.
And that was part of RCS? Like, was it
it was RCS.
Sub kind of a thing?
No, it was RCS. And it's morphed since then to what blokes like Nick Kentish and others are teaching now, but and have taken what we started off, which was pretty rudimentary, and done a fantastic job with it. But that was our parallel. And I spent a lot of time with David just travelling and looking and trying to understand these biological systems. And so I guess at that time RCS was also dealing with a lot of cropping systems as well. It wasn't just the grazing. So that was a fantastic experience for me professionally. I was able to work in benchmarking cotton, citrus, grapes, what makes them tick, what's the biology of this job versus that job versus this job, the soils, the food web, the numbers, the dollars, the people, as RCS does so incredibly well, to again reach a point of comfort with what truly is, okay, this is going to work, or that isn't going to work. I mean, a farming system.
Mate, that's pretty. I'm going to just do something. Can you hear that buzz in the background? What is that? Hang on. It's the fridge. I'm just going to turn the buzzing off.
I hadn't picked it up, Charlie.
I can get out of here.
You're trapped in your own
world.
Web.
I'm getting trapped in your world. Here we go. I'll just turn that little puppy off there. That's better. No, bang, it's isn't it?
It is a beautiful view that we've got here.
No, HMV made fridges.
I thought you'd have an Esky, to be honest.
Eh?
I thought you'd just have an Esky, but you're right, it is a 1945
Yeah, no, it's a bit of age to it.
Kelvinator.
HMV, his master's voice.
True.
Didn't know they did I know they did record players. So, I mean, were you considered an agronomist? Were you calling yourself an agronomist?
I never have. I guess at some level I've always been intersecting with the agronomy world, and I've worked with lots and lots of agronomists. Well, I have shared consulting arrangements with consultants most of my professional life, but I've never actually called myself an agronomist, even though. And that's basically because I point blank refuse to get involved in the day to day because it would send me nuts, and I'm more interested in the longitudinal, the change over time, the months, the seasons, the quarterly, annual cycle, not the what's going on today. That's important, but that's what the agronomist does, right? So, although that's changing too, but my experience of agronomy, and I spend a lot of time in cotton and wheat and the broadacre, agronomists have a tough gig, right? And they find it very hard to find the space, the headspace, to go and see all those things we've been talking about. And there are some very good agronomists, but they don't get that headspace to go and look for that stuff and to search for that stuff because they're on the acres, they're on the hours, to get around because there's not enough of them generally. So no, I don't do that.
What happened next? RCS agronomising.
Well, I wasn't. I was a consultant. I actually pretended to be, a trainer there for a little while. I concluded that I couldn't train, and I think a few other people concluded that I couldn't train either. But it seemed I was enthusiastic enough that people sort of put up with me for a few years. But
you mean as part of the RCS training team?
Yeah, no, look, I was blessed. Right, I got to with David. I mean, David is the quiet, or was the he's just not long past. He was the abbot to Terry McCosker's Costello.
Yeah,
very, very amazing man. So I got to spend some time with him, and I would probably say to this day he's probably the only guy that successfully managed me for a little while. And so we did a bit of training, and David was very good at it, and I was very poor at it, and so I would increasingly do consulting and kind of strategic work, and anyway, and things evolved from there. And at the end of the day, also. We teach best what we most need to learn, and I found that I needed to stop doing that and go and do other things and be a lone ranger again. So that's where I guess I went from there.
So what was lone rangering look like?
I love lone rangering. I think I was, maybe it's me hiding in a cave somewhere pretending, but to my mind it gives me flexibility to go and do what I need to do, which is really just what I want to do. But and that means explore, deconstruct, reconstruct. And what did that look like? Well, I guess, actually, now I think about it, I got very sick, actually. That's the other thing. I got sick again, and I tend to do that through life. I guess we all do, right? We heard about it yesterday, this whole regenerative journey. Again, wife, probably my better judge of these things, will always know when there's a crash coming and incoming. And I crashed. So I recall having leave for the first time in my entire life because I was actually leaving a paid job, and I took leave, and I basically what did I have? I had Ross River and a couple of other things, and I was crook as a dog, slept, and I sort of looked around, and I said to the wife, we'd just spent an enormous amount of money in this garden. You're very familiar with nice gardens, and we built this nice garden, a nice old 1920s home in Moree. I don't know why. Sometimes people shouldn't let me speak, but I'm talking to the lady that owned the nursery, and I said, we should buy shares. Anyway, a couple of months later, we bought the nursery, again with no equity, and had to convince 3 banks that didn't know the other bank was lending. And next thing you know, we own a nursery 7 days a week with toddlers again. And, well, I guess at that stage there's only one toddler. And so that was a 7-day-a-week job. And my wife hasn't actually forgiven me for that to this day. So we did that for a bit, and then and she said that within 6 months she said within 6 months she'll be doing something else. And I said, no, I'm here. We're going to do this together. This is a 7-day-a-week job. I got it. I'm with you. 6 months to the day, she actually was right. We had a compost business down the back, took landscaping, made it into composting. Next thing you know, we're making compost in the back of this industrial block, and then one thing leads to another, and a fantastic, again, and someone tried to mentor me and had a pretty good crack at managing me over time was a great guy called David Turner, and David and Betsy Turner were great influences on my life for a strong period of time, and we went into business together, composting and actually extracting biology from compost, and then into a whole world of biology, and we had a business there that grew, and we ended up having quite a going concern, and that was the next decade, I think, from memory. Where again, just embedded in the cropping, not so much the grazing world, but the cropping world, that whole floodplain, black soil, cotton region, and that was a hell of a ride. Loved it.
So Compost Teas, influenced by Elaine Ingham and that sort of stuff?
We did a bunch of, I think about it now, we did some of the first that I'm aware of, liquid injector on broadacre scale, vesicular arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi.
How do you say that so quickly?
VAM, right? It's just VAM. It's just mycorrhizal fungi. Yeah. And, we had quite an amazing setup that I don't think will ever be replicated, because we tried to do on a micro scale, and it actually became, we had tankers and we had the full shebang, and we were delivering stuff around the country. It was strains of biology, it was compost extracts, it was compost, it was a whole bunch of stuff, and we had, that was a world that we were in, and I think it was ultimately very difficult to scale that. Yeah, that was our lesson.
Why couldn't it be scaled? Isn't it just a volume?
It loses the nuance, and I think that's part of the whole dilemma of agronomy, that you scale and you've become that thing that you didn't want to become. And that's the challenge of this space, I think, at the end of the day, because this needs to scale. But to scale those nuanced supply systems, and that's ultimately what we're talking about there, whether it's the seed, inoculation, nutrient, mineral, that whole package, and then how you do that, right? Because you've got to get it from some source of, whether it's compost or a derivative of that or whatever, through a series of steps to the seed or to the crop or to the tree or to the animal. That's a challenge.
But getting bigger, is an element of that getting bigger, you're losing quality and control and kind of, but you're starting to look a bit more like a industrial developer.
The thing that you set out not to be, yeah.
Yeah.
Look, I'm not being negative, because I think people have shown that can be done, and I think that will happen. I used to consider it an attempt to decentralise what is a centralised supply system at the moment. We bring in urea from China, we go and make it now, or we basically have this very centralised system of supplying the agricultural world, and we've been trying on the edges, organics, biodynamics, and everything since then to come up with other versions of that are sustainable, and they've always been a challenge. I think there's ways of doing it, right? And they are being done. And those are all of the things that you've been exposed to, all the people that you've been talking to over the years, and all of the things that we've all been talking about this last couple of days, and continue to. That is the challenge, right? To beat that very efficient system, which is inexorably unsustainable.
So if one was a farmer, I guess maybe the next step from that was or could be certainly the world of our biodynamics and what we teach and try and, kind of encourage people or get people into is we'll make your own. Yeah,
and biodynamics is probably the exception to the rule, because it keeps the nuance. It maintains the nuance and that very very detailed set of things around the how and the when and the what and the why that tends to get lost in other systems where people want something generic. And that's part of my lesson for the last 20 years is that to generalise something loses too much. And that's one of the challenges of training and education and consulting and doing.
Mm. Mate, have you got your chronometer on you? What's the time now? I'm just going to make sure I'm not going to delay you from your...
My back left cortex says it's about 8:01. But I'm guessing.
You're looking at the sun that's not there.
Yeah.
I think you're probably about right. Oh, because you would have made note of when we kicked off. I trust. You were getting to, so burnout or
yes, burnout. But we all do that, right? I just do a better job of it than most.
Yeah, but I'd go. So what did that look like? Lethargy. I know you had Ross River fever.
That time. Another time it was the first time at Mines was a pretty good go. Then there was Ross River. Then the last one was Legionnaires. Actually, that was the beginning of Myer. Actually, so.
You got over Legionnaires before you got into that one?
No, I was in bed for 100 days. I'm exaggerating, and people are going to say, no, you weren't. It was 99 days. But I was in bed for a while, and crook as a dog, and had the chance to, and to the credit of some people around me, I won't name names, but I was still living off consulting at that stage. I had a coterie of clients around the country, and I was just so fortunate to think about the kind of people that I'd been able to spend time with to that point. They just said, just go and get better. And one thing led to another with another line of thought that actually resulted in going down the data and the software path, which is a much bigger story than that, but that's just my own connection to that gave me the room to actually go and do a few things mentally in bed with a bunch of stuff to say, right, let's go and talk to someone about how we do this. That's my state on it, right? So people like Big Al will have a different version of that, but basically that was the end of that journey for me in terms of running around like a mad thing, and taking that software path.
So finished up at Moree, went coastal in all this time.
Yeah, I remember saying to the kids, "Where would you like to live?" Because I dragged them around, for a while now. My wife and I dragged them around for a while now, and we worked in a few 7-day-a-week businesses. And anyway, long story short, I said to the kids, "Where would you like to live if you had the chance?" Thinking that they'd say, "Down the road." And they said Port Macquarie. And crikey, right? So we better go for a look. And went for a holiday. Actually, New Year's first week of the year, little place, rented a little house for a week. 3 weeks later, we took them out of school, started, and moved. It was never intended. I moved to a little place about almost an hour south of there. Been there ever since. A little town with a general store and 200 people, and just my kind of deal on the river.
So back to my grazing. Let's get into that. So you were sort of, you were thinking that's where you wanted to head. You had some reflective time in bed. No,
it doesn't tend to work that way for me. I had some reflective time, but I was consulting, and again, this is my version of it. Alistair will have, and Bert. I believe you'll meet Bert, in a cerebral world shortly.
I used to play footy with him years ago.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Was he a bastard? He would have been
I'm not at liberty to talk about other guests. He was a good rugby player, no doubt.
I would have loved to play it against Bert. But anyway, look, I do recall it. I actually remember seeing smoke come out of a laptop, which is a first, and I probably haven't seen it since then. I managed to blow the database up that had my entire... We had a bunch of stuff in there, mapping out a bunch of crops, which is things that I've been doing and working through over time, which is kind of how I do what I do. A gazillion data points, and included in that was some work that I'd been doing for Wilmot around all the things that we talked about yesterday and so on. And when that laptop blew up, Alistair said, there's something this doesn't... but what are we doing?
Because it was like in Excel or some other program.
It was Excel Plus, right? It was Excel and a bunch of joined databases and a whole bunch of things that I used to do. And that was there was a confluence with drought and big decision making and some really brutal times in terms of learning all the things that we were talking about yesterday, or our versions of it. And one thing led to another, where not having a digitised grazing chart and a universal set of numbers in front of a team that were making decisions around, some big decisions around stocking, a meaningful operation, meant this is nuts. What are we going to do about it? Well, okay, let's go and talk to people that think they know about software and see what they've got to say, because this spreadsheet thing's not working. It works to an extent, but it just doesn't work for once you start to think about the kind of operations we're talking about. So, So we sat down with some guys in the software world and decided to have a crack at digitising. And that was the day that sliding door opened, and I've spent a fair bit of time in that world since, and probably still there.
So you started with Al and Wilmot as an advisor or consulting. Is that how?
Back to the trout that changed the world.
Oh yeah,
my world at least. I think I'd like to think at some point it will actually be the trout that changed the world, but that's just my very selfish, narrow view of things. But I met Alistair somewhere along the way, and Bert. I remember sitting down with him on a farm.
Were you like fishing in his creek, and he went, "Oi, what are you doing?"
No. I was doing what I do, and I'd moved from the cropping world into the grazing world because it was a lot more predictable, and I was burned out on cropping and a frost in August, stuffing up 9 months worth of preparation. And anyway, I got into the grazing, doing what I do in the grazing world a lot more, and a fantastic fellow, actually, Greg Chappell, said, "You need to meet this bloke." And anyway, we had a meeting, we were talking about things, and we just got running through how we do what we do, which came back to the chemistry, the biology, the whole fundamentals of how this farm could go from this to this to this, the grazing, the management, the whole thing we've spent the last day or two talking about. And I met this guy that sounded a bit funny, and I thought, he seems reasonably intelligent, and we did a day of walking around here and doing that, and I went off on my merry way, and a couple of times over the next couple of months there was conversations around doing something up at these farms that this guy who talked a little bit funny was referring to, and I said, I'm pretty busy, got too much going on, it's not my scene. Thank you, but I can't do it. And somehow it became apparent that it was at Ebor, and so I actually next time there was a chance to communicate, I asked, where is that farm? And when it was explained, I said, I'll be there tomorrow.
Because he said, was it Creek? Jack's Creek?
Jock's Water.
Jock's Water.
So when I actually realised that Alistair was talking about this beautiful part of the world where my link to the whole thing kind of started, I said, I'll be there on Tuesday.
Wow.
And I vividly recall walking around the farm and trying to understand the vision that was laid out at that time for the way that the business was growing and where it wanted to go and what it wanted to do and what it was doing. And again, it was love at first sight.
Wow. How many years ago? 4 years ago? 5? 4?
That was about 2011-ish, I think. So,
yeah, right.
So, yeah, so it was a consulting arrangement where Bert would do his very, very best to try and manage my time, and
because Bert was up here by then.
Bert, probably not actually. No,
he was down south.
He was on his way up here. Yeah. I say that because I can still recall Bert giving up on trying to manage my time. So you might remind him of that one.
I'm sure it'll come up.
So yeah, I had a consulting,
and he might start crying. So
yeah,
might have some tissues there.
Yeah, Bert is far too capable to try and worry about managing my time. So there was a whole period of time where the job was to see this vision through from what Wilmot was at that in those early days of going from a set stocked, big, rangy export cattle, bullock cattle job to what you see now, which is over a decade and a bit, a really remarkable transformation in a business, in its people and its landscape. And that's the thing that I keep coming back to. And I guess I've been blessed to be able to come back to that regularly, reasonably often. And woven through that was this need to develop this digitised version of that set of steps and that whole embodiment of the grazing chart and the holistic management and all the RCS stuff. And we were living it and doing it, and we being this incredible team that Alistair has built around that operation. And one of the things that it needed was some software to sort of hang it together, and that's always an ongoing challenge. But Maya was born from that, and yeah, so that began, I think, probably halfway through that period of time. I think it was 14 or 15.
Yep, and that's been developed constantly, and we had a good demo. You have a good demo yesterday at the Maya Grazing Field Day, which was where it's day 2.
Day 2.
And you've got to make sure you don't miss your cue. And its capacity. And I guess what pops out the other end is,
sure,
what decision makers need to know about.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, Maya was born out of the need to connect numbers back to decisions in a meaningful way and then become so much more. But basically, it's grown. It's become a beast, and it's filled out into a business that's then related to a bunch of other things going on, around that whole space of natural capital that were not even thought of or constructed in a way that you could articulate when that all began. And that's the beautiful evolution that we've been watching. So Maya is kind of the thread of numbers that holds in my view, it helps tell the story of changing landscape, right? And it goes back to that original point about needing to deconstruct, reconstruct, and then be able to tell the story. And if you haven't got that, it's very, very difficult. And that's where I think organics and the whole original regenerative world failed, because they couldn't tell the story in numbers. They could only tell it through emotion. They could only tell it through anecdote. They could only tell it through what if and could and should. I know there's some exceptions, but generally not, right? But now we live in a world where we have to be able to show and validate, this was the change and here are the numbers. And this is how it hangs together. And not just that this is how it looks. Understanding the patterns that exist within that to be able to replicate it and consistently reapply the steps along the way, to the point where ultimately we're going to be able to say, this carbon that we're all talking about, what are the number correlations to how we graze? This pattern of grazing, this pattern of behaviour, this pattern of practice change, this depth of practice change, how does it look in numbers or colours? It doesn't matter what the decimal points are, but that's our space.
Who is, if you can tell me, the organisation that's helping you pull the carbon numbers and the monitoring? Maya's keeping a track of above ground, essentially.
Yeah, there's multiple, right? There's multiple. I mean, that space is growing quickly, but Carbon Link is a key player. AgriProve is in the space. There's some people in the States. There's a whole bunch of energy and motivation and dollars moving to meet the market. And our role is to not just do what we do with the specifics of management on this farm at this point in time for the job of stocking rate carrying capacity and managing livestock relationship to supply and demand on feed, but then taking that further too, linking it to natural capital. Because in the absence of that, like we saw yesterday, you really are just telling a story that's based on emotion. You're not actually able to show demonstrable change that can be taken to the bank. Mm. So we're dealing with a bunch of people, and that space is going to change a lot more. We're on a pretty, I think, direct trajectory to meeting the market that is way ahead of us at the moment. I think the market's ahead of supply in terms of the whole carbon job.
Well, I mean, what we saw yesterday and the breadth of dare I say, experts and organisations and mobs that are offering to help farmers to get their head around all this sort of stuff. I mean, that's a really positive thing, isn't it?
Look, I think again at the risk of generalising too much here, the whole movement through the 70s and 80s, into the organic, that whole sustainability paradigm and paradox is kind of now just finding its true path to something that allows supply and demand, principle and ethics, ecology and market to say, we can see a path here. Finally. And how we describe it and what it might get labelled as with regen or natural capital and so on, carbon, that's working itself out. The point is, though, that it's on the table now, and it's almost like this perfect storm of climate. Well, it is. It's the perfect storm of climate change, market dynamics, risk mitigation, financial sector change, and all the while there is this data building up on farms. It's a perfect storm. It's lovely. It's almost terrifying, but it's lovely.
So what's again? How are we going for? It's 10 past. Oh, no, it's not 10 past. What is it now? You reckon? Given what you know,
left cerebral cortex says 8:11ish, but prep for the next thing is again, time's a construct, right? I've learned now that I'm not going to get the prep that I thought I would, and that's my next risk is will I look like I know what I'm talking about the next time I have to do this. The next hour.
The next thing.
But right now, my concern is you, Charlie. And if we've got to go, we've got to go.
Well, what I want to do is I want to finish this shortly, and then do a quick little extra bit, which won't run over time, the general time that we had put aside. That's just how I break it down. You mentioned. I mean, I was even thinking, maybe I'll catch up with you some other day and your life and do part B.
Can I bring a bandana? Have you got a spare bandana?
Do you want to wear one now?
No, I wouldn't take yours. In preparation for next time, I'm going to get a bandana.
Well, that would be nice. I'm waiting for one of my guests to turn up with one.
Why didn't I think of that?
Cole Phelan actually turned up to something we did in Barrel a couple of years ago with one.
Did he?
Cheeky bastard. Permanence. You mentioned permanence there before, which is really interesting. That you know, I guess is a why. And I come across with the words you used. You didn't say it's important to me, but you said it's kind of, you made note of it.
It's a great philosophical question in life, right? I mean, what actually matters? You know, sometimes my focus at these properties around us here is on the grass, the here and now, the animal performance in the here and now, my relationship to the business performance in the here and now. What actually matters? And it goes back to it's a philosophical dilemma, right? Because and then after that, I'll be walking the water, and I'll be looking at the result of all of that in things like the trout, where we began this conversation. And what if there are no trout? Well, it's because what we've been doing isn't working. And does that matter? Yeah, I think it does, because we then have missed an opportunity to do more. And when we're all gone, what happens then? You know, we are all going to be gone, and that is this constant dilemma about, are we contributing to that? Because we're going to be gone. When we're gone, have we contributed to the steps and the incremental gains that mean that this thing, whatever this thing is, it's a bunch of landscapes, continues to survive despite us, and back to that deep ecology concept that we aren't actually important. You know, as long as we're not the impediment, you know, as long as we can contribute and not be the impediment, we're going to be okay. But then back to what matters, right? And so that's this whole dilemma around permanence for me.
Well, I guess it's, we have the opportunity, whether we choose to take it or not, to contribute in a positive or negative way.
Absolutely. That's our choice. That's that's our life experience at the end of the day, right? Because every single day counts.
Totally. Mate, I'm just thinking of this I've got some others stored up for the next one. So much more, but you're not making it easy. Oh, what's your genius, mate? What's your genius?
That's a tough one. Look,
and you can. This is not about being humble right now.
Oh, I think it goes with the territory. Look, I don't have a genius. I will say, I thought I was going to play for the Wallabies for a long time and joined.
Did you play for the Brumbies?
The Brumbies didn't exist at that point, and I ended up playing in the under-21s. I actually played with some blokes called Roth and Larkham and Gregan for about a day. They went on to other things, and this was before they were very good at.
What position were you, mate? You look like
I was inside flanker, which is why I've always followed David Baker. I was different version. Anyway, point being, I was told I'd do reasonably well in rugby if I learned to be smarter about how I played, and if I didn't, then I probably wouldn't be able to play forever because of the way I played. And I thought, no, you don't know what you're talking about. I do, and I'm just going to go as hard as I can for as long as I can because that's all I know. And in the end, they were right and I was wrong, and I couldn't keep playing rugby, and because physics just doesn't work that way. Despite kinetic force just doesn't allow for that because the thing became professional and people got bigger and I didn't. And point being, I used to think I was quite good, but I wasn't. I just tried harder than anyone else.
Which still made you good.
I wasn't good. I just actually tried harder than anybody else, and that was my marker. And so back to your question, I don't know that I'm actually very good at much, but I will never leave anything on the paddock in terms of what I'm doing at the time, and so then I'm comfortable that I've been able to give to that. And then sometimes I might do it in a way that communicates, and often it doesn't terribly well. And that's my wife keeps telling me that's my job. And my challenge in life is to learn how to communicate. And I'm increasingly thinking that might be through numbers and patterns.
Well, mate, you've done a bloody good job at communicating today.
It's only your influence, Charlie.
I just want to put in your coffee, mate. I'm glad you had that coffee.
It's been a pleasure. I've actually reached my word count. I don't know that I've got capacity for more today, and it's only just ticked over 8 a.m, so that's pretty well screwed everyone else's plans.
Well, mate, let's leave it there. Let's do our next little bit for our Patreon members. For those who want to know what Bart says next, that could be like we should have a show called that. Every month we have what will Bart say next.
There's a few people worried about what that might be.
The people waiting for you at 9 o'clock today. So if you want to find out what Bart says next, then please jump on our website, charliearnott.com.au, and you can. I think it's worked out about 2 coffees a month.
Worth it.
Yeah, I reckon. You got transcripts of each of these interviews. You've got the extra bits. Bart's going to be our extra bit this month. This interview, you get that, and also webinars we do once a month with guests. And also opportunities to chat with me, Q&As, get to choose guess or be a guest yourself if you play your cards right.
I've got to say, that's extraordinary value.
I reckon it's not too bad. We're actually looking to reshape that into a bigger kind of a offering to a greater audience, not to abandon our Patreon members, but actually give the world a better kind of offering for. And I'll talk to you offline about it because you're in my sights in some nice way. Because there's a lot of people. I'm not an expert in anything. I'm good at pulling people together and letting them tell their stories and help facilitate them to help other people. So that's what we're trying to do. And we've got a good network, and we've got people who we want to tell their stories and help them tell this.
Good on you.
Be expressive. So that's what we're going to do.
And that's your genius.
Well, I haven't done it yet. So I haven't worked it out. I'm warming up to it. But I think there's a need. I've been looking at the landscape of this kind of stuff, and some wonderful, wonderful people out there doing some just amazing things. And as we saw a lot of them yesterday, it's like how do we create an opportunity for people to get that in one spot?
That's a pretty.
I reckon
that's an attractive proposition.
Yeah, I think so. And there can be all different levels of kind of what that looks like and who's on board and what they get and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, that's another conversation. I don't tell too many. No one's going to listen to this anyway, so no one will know. No, they will. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed that, Bart. I've really enjoyed, because I've been sitting here playing my own game of what will Bart say next.
Thanks, Charlie. I've really enjoyed it.
That's good, mate. Well, look, we'll knock off this one. If you want to hear what Bart says next, join the Patreon team. See you, mate.
See ya. Thanks, Charlie.
In our next week's episode of The Regenerative Journey, I speak with Bert Glover. I've known Bert for a long time, played with and against him in rugby union, and I caught up with Bert on the back of the My Grazing Field Day some time ago at Ebor. He's all about natural capital and good, sound regenerative farming, and I hope you enjoy that interview next week on The Regenerative Journey.
This podcast is produced by Rhys Jones at Jaeger Media. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to subscribe, share, rate and review. For more episode information, please head over to www.charliearnott.com.au.